move on to the consent agenda. I need a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Before we move into the resolutions, I've just looked at the 8 requests for testimony from members of the audience, and I can't really identify any that pertain to the resolutions that we're considering today. Oops, we've got 10 now. If you disagree and want to testify when we consider these resolutions, please say so. We'll try to accommodate you. With that, we'll move. Oh, I'm sorry, Beth. Damn, I forgot about your financial report. Move right into consent agenda. Oops. I think that's the second time I've neglected your cards.
I'll take that as a
I'm comfort level with
Well, thank you, Mr. President, and it will be a little briefer today because you'll note that there are no June financials in your packet this month, and that's, as Board Member Schweitzer alluded to, it's June. We're reporting on June. That's our year-end, our fiscal year-end, and so we're closing the books for the year with our auditor. And despite the fact that our accounting staff has been working evenings and weekends and working with our outside auditor, the books are not closed at this time. We're still waiting for some data from outside sources, so our 2 pension fund actuaries, the actuary that does our OPEB, our post-retirement health care work, that isn't there, and there are a few other details. So we didn't want to put out in the public draft statements, which we know are going to change. But we have done our review of them. We did a review at Finance Committee, and we met with the independent auditor. Finance Committee met with the independent auditors earlier this month, and we don't expect any material changes or substantive changes from draft to final. Let me just give you a brief summary of what we discussed in Finance Committee this morning and what the year-end will show. It's very consistent with the trends that we've been reporting over the year. Revenue and expenditure trends are consistent with former reports. Our operating revenue for the year will be about 7% under our original budget, primarily due, as we know, to the recession, to lower payroll tax revenues and lower passenger revenues. And Steve, in answer to the question about passenger revenue, we can forecast that on a macro level. We don't build up line by line but we make it consistent with the underlying growth trends that we have with payroll tax revenues. A little more detail than that, but it is it's the second biggest revenue item in our operating budget, so we do think about that in the context of that overall forecast. And then, so operating expenditure revenues, as we've discussed, have been lower. Operating expenditures were also lower, not by the same percentage, but to keep us within our budget targets for the year. And the primary variances under budget in the expenditures were personnel costs in operations, so that we did not have any layoffs, but due to attrition and slightly lower FTE. And then the biggest number, as it is positive variance has been the fact that our accessible transportation costs are lower, so fewer lift rides. We're still meeting all the demand for lift service, but similar to riders on fixed route service, there's been less demand for lift ridership as well. And as I mentioned, overall, we have verified that we're in compliance with Oregon budget law. But the budget law requires us that expenditures cannot exceed budget expenditures if it doesn't address our revenues, and we are in all categories within that. We are in compliance there. And as Tiffany reported, the auditors, and we will report with our annual financials and the published audited results in September at the September board meeting. So now we look forward to fiscal year 11, and we're in our first month, and the question is, are the assumptions that are underlying our budget that we made earlier realistic given what we're seeing in the economy? And macroeconomic trends, as I report every month on macroeconomic trends, we follow those because that's what affects employment, what affects payroll tax receipts directly, and ridership directly and indirectly. So we're 1 month into, we have June data, and which is actually the end of the fiscal year, but it's the information we have as we enter fiscal year 11. First thing we look at is unemployment. And the unemployment rate in all 3 counties is down significantly from where we were a year ago. Clackamas is now at 9.7. We were at 10.7% unemployment last year at this time. Multnomah, 9.5%, down from 10.9. I think it was the high point, the worst month for Multnomah last June. And Washington County is down to 8.4% from 9.7% last year. So that trend is good, but what we actually care about is employment. And there has actually been a decrease, a slight decrease in total employment in the 3 counties since last June, of about 15,000 jobs. And that trend is similar to what we're seeing at the state level as well. The state unemployment rate is down from almost more than 1 full point from last year, but total employment in the state is also down. And that is reflects a national trend of the workforce getting smaller, explanations being discouraged workers, people have been out of work and given up looking for work, maybe they'll come back in, but that's the number we really focus on is employment and wage, level of wages, because that's what determines our payroll tax receipts, is the dollar amount of wages paid. And in the state, the biggest loss in jobs has been manufacturing and construction jobs, which are relatively high-wage jobs. There is some modest good news in June. Inflation is modest, 1.1% for the year in June. New home sales improved in June, but it was after a terrible month of May. That's the worst, one of the worst months in May. And locally, in the news this morning, we saw that home prices have improved slightly. But again, it's coming off of a low base, but there is movement in the right direction. And the employment in our 3 counties has actually been, in the last few months, while it's below where it was last year, has been slightly trending up. So I think we feel we've hit the bottom. Hopefully it's not a double-dip recession, but the question is how fast is the recovery? And so our forecast underlined, just to review where we were for the fiscal year 11, we're assuming modest growth in the underlying payroll tax revenues in fiscal 11. And this gets us back to, in our forecast, absolute levels of payroll tax revenues where we were in 08 and 09. So it's very modest, and we're monitoring it, but still comfortable with that. And as we go through the year, if we feel that macroeconomics or other conditions don't warrant this, we continue to look at it and then adjust the budget if we feel we need to. So that's the big picture. You do have, I'm going to turn to the investment report unless there are questions. You do have the investment report for June in the package. You'll see a much higher unrestricted cash balance in June of about $94 million. And last month we were about $70 million. Those are high numbers. They reflect the receipt of federal grants, which we typically get in June. We also get payroll tax receipts in May, and we get self-employment in April, so our balances tend to go up at the end of the year. This is a typical pattern. And it just illustrates the uneven nature of the revenues that come in. And we need our revenue balances, our unrestricted balance, to be high at the beginning of the year to carry us through the end of the year. So when you look at what they're invested in, they're all in short-term, high credit quality investments. We have $42 million, which is the maximum we're allowed to have in the state's short-term investment pool. It's a very actively managed fund by the state treasurer's office and is returning 0.55%, which sounds low but is extraordinarily high, very good return for a short-term portfolio. As comparison, our short-term investments that are not in the short-term pool are earning about 0.15%, which is about the yield on a 3-month treasury. So our overall yield blended with what's in the state pool and what we invest is about 3.35%. So as I have been doing, offer you assurance that we're meeting the goals of the investment policy, safety of principal, liquidity, and we are actually competitive on our yield, although the yield is third consideration, and just a competitive yield is still virtually nothing. And then finally, I would just like to make one comment. I've had a few questions about this, and just to put your mind at rest on our pension fund investments, there's been a lot of news in the paper that you might have seen about SEC rules and clamping down on public pension fund abuses. The issues that the SEC has been raising were investment managers who make political contributions to get business and brokers who get paid to get their investment managers hired. And I just want to give you comfort that none of this is relevant, or our pension funds have no such issues. Our pension funds, as Lynn knows, we use a consultant to provide expert advice to the trustees and selecting our investment managers, and the consultant also works to assist the trustees in monitoring their performance. And the board approved, you approved in March, we did a competitive RFP process to select that consultant. We had 8 responses, and the ATU and the TriMet trustees unanimously recommended one consultant, and that was approved, and that's who we're working with. And I think what's really important is that consultant is paid by the funds, and they serve as co-fiduciary with us, with the trustees. They receive no payments from the investment managers, so they have no conflict of interest. They're paid by the pension funds to represent the interest of their beneficiaries. So if you read about that and if you had any questions, I hope I can put your mind to rest on that.
Questions of Beth?
I'm not really a nerd, but
If you have to say
Well,
it,
I
then you
think I
probably
am,
are.
but I'm proving that I am. So if we assume that we have 100 million rides per year, is that about right? And our average cost of ridership went up 20 cents this last year. How did our cost of operation go down? And what's the reason for the average cost of ride going up? So, 2 questions. That's $20 million over the year.
Well, actually, no, I think what's happening is that the rides are the denominator on a pretty fixed cost. And so when there's a change in the denominator, the number of rides, the fixed cost of operating the system with a certain fixed headways and sort of maintenance costs and all the other pieces that stay the same. So a relatively small change in the denominator will make the ratio will sort of have repercussions for the ratio.
Well, I am a nerd, and before I answer that question, I really want to look at the components of that. But what I'm looking at in total operating costs are what are actually reported, and that includes a bigger universe. So when we're looking at and what I'm reporting are variances to budget. So our revenues were under budget, and our operating expenses were under budget. So it's kind of a little bit of apples to oranges.
Should we have any concern about, and I understand your point, but marginally speaking, the number of riders stayed relatively comparable, but to have a 6.7% increase in cost of ride, that's rather large. And if you multiply by 100 million, do we have any concern over that number at all? Is there anything to be?
Well, and again, I'm hesitant to without really digging into the numbers, but the cost, our costs go up each year, as we've discussed before. It includes the increase in the wage rate, it includes benefits, and so that's got to be part of it. I don't know if that accounts for the 6%, but that's part of the trend growth in expenses of operating the agency get reflected in that ratio.
And we can report back to you as we get into that.
Other questions of Ms. Dunn?